And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers. We have Kevin Sullivan, Principal Consultant at SDM Software, and we've got Danny Ferry, Senior Solutions Architect at SDM Software. And I will hand it over to Kevin.
Thank you, Kara. Hope everyone is well today. Glad to see people joining from all over. This is awesome. Yeah, we're here today to talk about configuration management. It's a pretty broad discussion, I think. We are, as a company, very focused on configuration management broadly across Group Policy and Intune. I personally have been in this space for a very long time, as most of us at SDM have. I spent most of my career working at Microsoft. I started there through the acquisition of a company called Desktop Standard, where we actually built what we then called GPO Vault, which is now called Advanced Group Policy Management. We also built group policy preferences and a few other things. But since I joined Microsoft, I've done lots of different things, all in the context of engineering, but I focused on Windows management, group policy, I focused on Intune, and was part of that Intune team for a very long time. And I left Microsoft for a minute in the middle of my tenure and got to spend some time with Darren in the early days of SDM. So it's really nice to come back and spend some time with these guys and work to spread our word. And I'm here with my friend Danny Ferry. Danny, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, Danny Ferry here. Yeah, like Kevin, I've been in the space for about 25, 30 years, primarily focusing on identity and access management, and then also some group policy lifecycle management. And I'm excited to be here and see um, uh, Kevin's Ask Jeeves floating head.
I was
I
trying
love
to
that
get out of the
view.
way of your description.
No problem. We're excited for this webinar, and hopefully it will be just as exciting for you all.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. We have a lot to cover. We're really trying to present a discussion or join a discussion or initiate a discussion that is broad, has some opportunities to go deep in certain areas, but we want to make sure that we address and discuss things around different challenges that your organization may have, whether you're large, small, regulated, unregulated. We want to talk about the infrastructures of group policy and Intune, how they're similar, how they're different, and from a admin perspective, what are the similarities and differences that we need to be aware of? How do I raise awareness around misconfigurations that potentially give us insight into ensuring that there's no conflicts going out, no misconfigurations. We avoid those career limiting configuration changes. And really part of the timing of this webinar and some other initiatives that we're doing is Microsoft decided it was time to retire Advanced Group Policy Management and some other MDOP components, the Microsoft Desktop Optimization Pack components. And having been a part of AGPM from its very early days, the very first initiation of this product was literally sitting in a bar at a conference in Vancouver in about 2004 and sketching out what change management for group policy may look like on a bar napkin. And 20 years later plus, we have this incredible solution that people have relied on, and now it's going away. What do we do? And we also, even though that moment is important, right? This thing that many people have relied on is going to no longer be available. Really, it's a moment for us to step back and think about, how do I modernize my environment? How do I make sure that I'm either in the journey, ready for this journey to adopt more cloud services, or I'm doing it wholesale or, whatever. So we want to cover a lot of these things. From an AGPM perspective, I want to make sure that there's some insight into what kinds of complexities we experience with customers. So Danny, do you have any things that pop to top of your mind?
Yeah, so there's, quite a bit of different things here. As folks are thinking of moving off of AGPM, or maybe they're just thinking of establishing a configuration or a change management solution right from the get-go. Some of the challenges are considerations of high cost of any business disruptions that might come about from it. Scattered IT teams, that's a big challenge as well. You have different teams that are taking care of different portions of the environment, and so forth. There's AI adoption. You have a pretty good story to talk about on AI adoptions.
Yeah, you bring up those different teams and the different, sometimes those different teams work very well together, and sometimes they don't even talk to each other, right? So when you're in a siloed organization, ensuring that there's interesting flow or efficient flow of information back and forth is super important. We encounter this a lot of times because we talk to people who are super invested still in 2026 in their group policy infrastructure. Um, and they know that the organization has some Intune interest, but it's a different team and they don't know what's going on over there. And that can be very challenging. So, yeah, we do have some big items like Danny brought up AI. I think what's going on in AI right now is a combination of exciting, super exciting, maybe a little infuriating, and possibly horrifying to some people. But I find I'm very hopeful about what's happening. But I also find there's chaos that we need to work around. We need to ensure that we're doing the right thing for our organization. Many people in the US are aware that our government removed a contract from Anthropic because Anthropic wouldn't give unrestricted access to their code base to the government. Their mission, their vision is really protective of individual privacies. And then they turned that over to OpenAI. And OpenAI just yesterday bought a new company that's doing agentic work. And, all of that change is good, right? Hopefully it will resolve into something that's really reliable. But in the midst of the change, relying on the technologies as they exist so that we can ensure efficient, consistent business operations is super important. So even though I look at that and I'm interested, I sort of hold on to it as something to keep in the background. Every day I use AI, just not as necessarily a part of my core. I'm going to talk a little bit more further down the deck about how Microsoft is implementing the security copilot components into the security stack. But over these things, actually, before I move off of the big picture or hand this over to Danny, there's another sort of timely element to think about. And many of you might be aware of what Microsoft has introduced called the Intune Suite. It's a suite of components that align to configuration management scenarios. It's sort of individual components that address unique scenarios. There's elevated privilege management, there's enterprise application management, there's something called advanced analytics. All of these suite components, I believe after July 1st of this year, when Microsoft starts their fiscal year, they will all be available to you through your E3 and E3 licensing structures. But work with your Microsoft folks to figure that out. But advanced analytics, which is proposed to be a part of your E3 licensing, is a super interesting bit of technology that's really about reporting on health or creating awareness around health. That's going to be one of those intersections of where AI is going to be able to look into the services that you're running and be dynamic and sort of learn and grow based on experiences. Imagine you're monitoring app health on a certain number of endpoints in your organization, and in the back end, there's stuff happening, churn, and things are crashing, and crash numbers are rising, and you're seeing spikes. AI, in its vision, is going to be able to look at that and dynamically react to that and make adjustments or recommendations on the fly. So keep aware of Intune Suite. Do some looking into that. It's going to be an impact, as well as the security copilot will also be impactful. So Danny, I'm going to pass it over to you for any last comments on the big picture.
Yeah, no, that was exactly what I was looking for. As folks are starting to either move to Intune or they've already moved to Intune, um, that brings new challenges, right?
Yeah.
Now you're working in two modes. You have GPOs for servers, and then you have Intune profile. Maybe you might have some on-prem workstations, but then you have Intune profiles as well that you have to take care of. So thank you for the slide. This slide here, what are some of the main challenges of managing these two processes? So, we've got a couple of ideas on the slide: limited governance, a lack of consistency between GPOs and Intune profiles. Then you start getting this comes up a lot when we're talking to customers: conflicts, duplicates, and security gaps. Um, how can you ensure that both policies and Intune profiles are not duplicating each other? Maybe there's security gaps. So how do you get that visibility in both? Now you're managing two systems. Kevin, what comes to your mind?
Yeah, there's so many stories that pop into my mind. I started working in the config management space in the mid 90s. I hate to say that out loud because it really makes me feel so old. Um, but I remember in the early days of group policy and the early days of Active Directory, I was with a very large organization in the Pacific Northwest doing a seminar, probably 50 so people in the room. And I was talking about different settings within group policy. I can't remember specifically what I was discussing, but I do recall this woman stood up and left the room. And it was very obvious. She was sitting up front. She was one of the leaders of the team. And when she came back during a break, I asked her if she was okay. And essentially, she said she was following along in my demo and she made a change to a setting related to remote access and she locked everyone out of the ability to manage group policy, like live in the middle of this session. And GP has always been this incredibly powerful infrastructure to manage, but it comes with some responsibility, right? We need to make sure that, like Danny's pointing out, we understand our configuration landscape, which includes conflicts, duplicates, security issues, and we have the analytics available to us to understand that in a deep and meaningful way. And many of you who are deep into group policy on a daily basis, I would bet money that you have GPOs in your environment, that you have no idea what the settings are or who the person was who created those GPOs. They may have left the company many years ago. And this technology has been around since, the early 2000s. And a lot of people still have some lingering stuff there. I do think, though, it's worth pointing out here that if I peel the onion back on these two platforms, group policy was very focused, very specific around managing Windows devices. There was a language called ADM that was first introduced to drive the experience in the UI so that I could change my settings, mostly registry based, although a list of client-side extensions grew over the years. And then at some point, that morphed into what we know today as ADMX. And a lot of organizations started building custom ADMX files to manage custom settings within devices and whatever, all registry-based policy. And that's great. We learned it. We got used to it. Not super hard. So Intune comes along, and Intune and the whole Microsoft security stack started to introduce new and exciting capabilities about PowerShell in some ways because it's peripherally very important. But the Intune service itself and Entra and Defender and Sentinel and Purview they all lay on top of this thing called the graph. And if you're familiar with the graph, great. But if you're not, just imagine this platform of endpoints that I can query and write against and whatever, so that I can manage and manipulate my whole system. So how I interact with the system is different in the service versus on GPO. And then on top of that, the Windows devices within your management scope from an Intune perspective have an MDM stack that interprets data coming down from the service. And that is defined by these things called CSPs, these documents that are available to you to see what kinds of settings are exposed and what you can do. And these are all industry standard, OData type nomenclatures, whatever. Anyway, I don't want to go too deep there, but the reality is, even though from a scenario perspective, we're all about writing the configurations that get deployed to the endpoints, now we have to think about two different infrastructures and two different ways to communicate that data. So I do think there's challenges, but real interesting opportunities to grow and to learn. So I'm going to move on to AGPM retirement because it's a really interesting moment. Danny, what are we up against here? What should we be concerned with, if anything?
Yeah, so even though Microsoft will stop supporting AGPM after April 14th, it doesn't mean that it's going to stop working. It will continue to be functional uh, as usual. For deprecated software, you're not going to be receiving any more security updates, technical support, unless you pay extra for the technical support, and so forth. Then you have the risk of incompatibility with modern systems, which will increase over time, and so forth. So these are some of the considerations that organizations need to consider. Another one is, it's true, some organizations most organizations will not allow, especially the larger ones, will not allow their organization to run unsupported software. There are some exceptions. You would have to do an exception. I remember when I was working at the bank, we could do an exception until a replacement was available, and then we would have to switch over to the replacement. So that might be the situation in your case, and that's some of the considerations that you need to consider.
So another thing that I want to add here, because I think it's important, I had a meeting in the last couple of weeks where someone in the meeting thought that group policy was going away in April. And
Oh,
we want to be
yikes.
really clear that that's not happening, right? This tool, this change control component that advanced group policy management provides is going away. That's going to be end of life. But group policy is going to remain. And there are scenarios that you are going to continue to rely on group policy for. Going back to a comment Danny made earlier about, organizational silos. When we think about endpoint management in the Intune space, that's iOS, Android, Mac OS, Linux, Windows, all different levels of fidelity of management for those endpoints. But server management is not something that's covered from a core perspective in Intune. You're going to still need to manage those servers. And group policy management is very popular in servers. So many stories about that over the years. But yeah, it's not going away. Group policy is going to be there for you. It's just the change management components will suddenly be gone. And it's not a time to fret, though. Is a time to reflect. It's a time to step back and think about, what? This cloud thing has been coming rapidly. Different organizations have adopted it at different rates. What does it mean to manage my configuration environment in a modern way? What does it mean to modernize? And since I have to think about moving away from AGPM, this is a really good moment to sort of stop and think about that whole effort. So I just want to jot at my notes to see if I wanted to raise anything. Um, but yeah, it's that time of reflection, and this is where you need to lean on your reporting solutions, like Danny brought up. Find your configuration conflicts, find your duplicates. Make sure that people who own group policy settings validate that they're still needed. Make sure that the endpoints in your environment are up to speed, all of those things. What comes to mind for you, Danny, when we think about AGPM going away and this opportunity to modernize environments? Or what are you hearing from some of the big organizations you work with?
Yeah, actually, a lot of people that I've spoken to, even though they're not on Intune, they do want to future-proof their investment. And so, in a lot of discussions that I have, they'll say, if I'm going to move away from, um, or we're moving off of AGPM because we're forced to move off of AGPM, that's forced us to consider, well, how are we now going to manage Intune profiles and do some change control around Intune profiles? How are we going to migrate those GPOs to Intune? Are we going to use a third-party solution like SDM, or are we going to use Microsoft's native tool in importing GPOs? So these are some of the configuration. These are some of the thought process that a lot of customers are going through right now.
Yeah, and opportunities to test and validate and sort of work through the scenarios as they come up. So I want to ask you to utilize the Q&A window or the chat window, I think, to help us understand what are the top challenges for you. And not a laundry list, but just like single individual challenges you have. We have a list. We have things that pop for us and areas that we want to consider. But I want to take a moment for folks to sort of go into that chat window and put some ideas in for us. And I'm going to monitor that for just a second. I
Yeah,
have
if
not
any,
having GPP, not having group policy preferences and needing to script everything. Matt, thank you for that. That is really interesting and totally true. Group policy preferences is another thing that's near and dear to my heart. And you're right, there's really no good story there natively. Understanding as you're doing this cleanup and this modernization effort is going to be huge. Oh, Nick, sprawl. Yes, sprawl. Drive mapping. Dustin brings up some very old school sort of scenarios, but yes, drive mapping is something that organizations tend to lean on a lot.
And if I can ask, also give some consideration as to what would you like to see? Like, so it's not only some of the challenges that you have with GPOs, but moving to Intune, what are some of the challenges that you're facing either moving to Intune or being within Intune? What are some of the things that you're having difficulty with?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Ned brought up AI and machine learning. That whole automation model is interesting. Again, something that we have capabilities today to leverage, but we're going to see them grow over the next, I can't imagine what it looks like in 12, 18, 24 months. Um, and
Yeah, and
it's
it's true.
interesting.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Danny. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, Matt had mentioned he would like to see an actual like-for-like solution.
Yeah, I was
Intune
going to
just
comment
isn't
on the
there.
same.
Yeah, yeah.
The thing, it's interesting because I've spent most of my career at Microsoft, and and in some ways I probably drank some Kool-Aid, but in other ways I think from an engineering perspective, the company makes very good choices. I don't know that they've always been great at communicating the vision. And when you talk about like for like, it was never part of the plan for Intune to be configuration manager, for example. It was never part of a plan to do like for like. It was really a change of mindset, a rethinking of everything from an endpoint management perspective, and an alignment with security, auditing, compliance, identity, throughout the Microsoft space. So if people want sort of that one-to-one, I would say you need to adjust your expectations a bit because it's not in the plan. But at the same time, the scenarios are going to be available to you. And thankfully, we have things like the graph and PowerShell so that you can build your own. But some of the things that pop for us when we think about challenges and opportunities are some organizations are legally regulated, right? They have external regulators that come in and monitor and make sure that configuration is happening as expected, and you need to prove it. And some organizations that don't have that, heavy burden of external regulation have plenty of internal regulation. You define, sometimes in a committee, sometimes as individuals, you define what the administrative intent is for your environment, and you need to ensure that that is reflected in reality. Like I can look at the back end of GP and get a really good sense of what kind of configuration is going out there. But until I look at the actual end nodes who are recipients of those configurations and validate that they're getting what I expect them to get, I'm not full circle, right? And that is especially important when we talk about things like security settings, because you can think about GP or Intune as FedEx or UPS or whatever. We just package those configurations and deliver them out to the recipients. But if we are packaging bad stuff that gets out there, you essentially create exploit opportunities. If you aren't hot on the zero trust architecture that's been really top of mind for many organizations, go check it out. Like there's certain tenets of zero trust framework that I think everyone should think about, be aware of, maybe implement some in their environment. I need to assume breach. I need to ensure that I live in a world where I just assume someone's trying to get in. How do I protect against that? Being able to deliver those configurations through Intune or GP and make sure conflicts aren't creating problems is important. You had some on here as well, Danny, that you thought were interesting specifically for larger organizations.
Yeah, and like we talked about earlier about the challenge of having siloed responsibilities, right? So you have teams that manage servers, you have teams that manage on-prem workstations, teams that manage Intune profiles. And so when you have a complexity like that, um, you start to think of governance. Who's the actual owner of the GPOs or of the Intune profiles, and how can they validate that what's there should be there, right? Then we have compliance. Are all the different policies across the organization compliant? You have Kevin talked about reliability, auditability. If we have so many people touching different types of policies, whether they're GPOs or Intune profiles, how are you able to audit that information of who did what, when, and where did they do it, right? So all these things are important. And then the last one is, it stands out blaring in my face, consistency. How can we make sure that not only the changes are consistent, but the processes are consistent. That you don't have one process for folks that are on-prem and then another process that folks that are managing with Intune profiles.
Yeah. Great comments, Danny. I'm sort of distracted by the amazing comments that are in the webinar chat and in the QA because some really good stuff coming in. And I want to acknowledge all of that. Thank you, audience, for participating. There's so many different steps along the process that we can drill into. But let's move in. Actually, before I move, I want to acknowledge a few things. There seems to be consistent feedback around things like group policy inheritance and overrides and lack of OU structure and Entra. And, a lot of these, some of these are growing pains, I think. But some of these are organizational or constructs that can be delivered by solutions to help you envision your reality. We used to always say that we didn't want to build software that organizations had to change their processes to adopt. We wanted to build solutions that were flexible enough so that organizations could use them in the way that they work. And I think the reality is there's a bit of a balance here. But keep in mind, Brian, Dr. Perez, all of you folks who talked about overrides and infrastructure components, we're going to talk about these in a little bit, but they are really important aspects of this service, of the different solutions out there. Let's move over to what this all means. I want to sort of try to map this out from a big picture perspective. And many of us, especially those who have been doing this for many years, know this inherently. Configuration management is not a start and stop thing. It's not a timeline that you have a beginning and an end and different checkpoints along the way. It is surely a life cycle. And there are moments within the management of IT, the management of the fabric of my corporate infrastructure, where I need to clean up and optimize. That's this moment now where we need to think, am I looking at the right reports? Am I finding my conflicts? Am I finding old, unused, or ineffective group policy objects? And maybe the result of some of that effort is I need to migrate those. And migration isn't just going from point A to point B. Sometimes it's consolidation. Hey, I've got 5 GPOs that seem to do the same thing. Can I create one GPO and make sure that they're targeting correctly, they're linked correctly? So that's one stage that's constantly happening, right? That's part of your day-to-day. Managing change helps us do better at the managing day-to-day, right? So if Kevin comes in and says, oh, I need to edit this policy, is everyone aware? Has it gone through checkpoints? Is it ensuring this is what AGPM brought to the table? This is what we built in GPO Vault. This is what we jotted down on a bar napkin in Vancouver in 2004 or 2005. And change management impacts almost everything we do in IT. Who's doing the changes, what changes they're allowed to do, who's monitoring that those changes are happening and effective, and who is actually deploying, who's that last point that clicks the button that pushes the configuration live. Lots of things to do in that. But that also leads into we need to constantly make sure we're considering whether something is still valid. So imagine I go to make a change and I have an auditor or maybe an approver who's going to review that change. They might have to ask me because they wouldn't know, is that still needed? It seems like you made a change to IE2. Why are you doing that? Is that important? Auditing and certifying the existing policies, the configuration objects, are going to help you ensure that long-term you have a more clean environment. And it's not a one-time thing, right? You're constantly auditing, like maybe every couple months, or maybe every time a change comes in, you're doing a mental checklist. And then another piece of the life cycle is, of course, ensuring that the endpoints themselves are reflecting the configurations that the admins intend to get out there. Validate compliance against desired state or desired intent. Thoughts on that, Danny? I think it's a real reality for organizations that none of these things exist in isolation. They're all part of this ever-evolving life cycle of our environment.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And on the screen here, we've kind of mapped out the SDM product suite to the life cycle of whatever it is. So, you have clean up, optimize, and migrate. GPO Migrator and GP Reporting Pack can help you do that. What I love about Migrator is Kevin had mentioned about consolidating a bunch of GPOs. But what about consolidating 4 or 5 GPOs and then selecting which parts of those GPOs and then consolidating it to an Intune profile? That's where GPO Migrator comes into play. And Reporting Pack will give you that, show me the conflicts and show me the duplicates and so forth. And then with Change Manager, yes, we have Change Manager that will make sure that you attach a change record for every change that you do. And AGPM, although it was great, it didn't handle linking of the GPOs. And so just as important it is to make sure and verify that a GPO is changed correctly, it's also just as important to make sure that the right GPO is linked to the right OU. Otherwise, you can have problems. With group policy auditing and attestation, if we have these third-party tools like Change Manager and GPO Migrator, it's great that they can audit, like Change Manager can audit itself and everything you do within it. But what about if someone comes through the back door, maybe signs in with a domain admin account, or maybe hacks? So how do you get notification that who made that change? And that's where group policy auditing and attestation solution comes into play. And then finally, compliance manager. That's that part that Kevin was saying. How do I certify what I put in my GPOs are actually getting to my endpoints? Is it just Kevin uses link and pray? You hope that it gets there. And then what if you're going through an audit and you need to prove to your auditor that a specific setting is actually getting to your endpoints? Compliance manager can give you that information. So this is how we map that suite of products to the individual portions of the life cycle.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. There's so much there. I want to give you an opportunity, Danny, to sort of raise actual customer experience that we've seen, and sort of map that to some of these different stages of planning.
Yeah. So, and this is a common experience. This is not just one person. These are many, many companies. We often see folks with that have over 75,000 endpoints, over 70,000 AD users. We've seen some corporations that have 1,000 policies to migrate. We've seen some that have 4,000. 30 internal IT team members to train. And we're talking not only about maybe Active Directory service owners, we're talking about those siloed departments like the server team and the workstation team and the Intune team. Everybody needing to to be able to be trained on how the corporation would like to do change management. And so some of the processes here is they did the assessment and planning. They wanted to find out, which GPOs are they going to, do they need to clean up any GPOs before they start on embark on a solution to manage change. They installed Change Manager and then configured it. Very simple. They onboarded GPOs over to Change Manager from AGPM. And then with Change Manager, we have a built-in utility that allows you to also migrate the history and the backups from AGPM over to Change Manager. And then finally, the greater IT team training. So this is a common scenario that many organizations, whether they're very large or they're small, find themselves in.
Yeah, and it Danny took some time and put a little demo together, a walkthrough, that I think is worth checking out. So I'm gonna present this demo and take a look and give us some feedback.
I'd like to share how SDM software can help organizations in achieving effective and reliable change management when it comes to GPOs and Intune profiles. Change Manager for Group Policy and Intune profiles provides a modern approach for ensuring that only approved changes happen within your Group Policy and Intune environments. It provides a strong defense against unwanted or unexpected changes compromising environmental security. And it does give you a single console for on-prem hybrid environments, as well as Intune profile management. And We also added a built-in utility to migrate history and backups from AGPM to CMGPI. When you first log into the web UI, you're presented with a dashboard. Here, you can quickly identify the status of your GPO management. Change Manager helps strengthen the security and governance by letting administrators assign specific roles, such as product administrator, break glass, GPO creator, auditor, and approver. And in version 1.9, we've added the ability to optionally enable the deployer role for a third level of review to provide even greater oversight and control. Some roles are assigned globally, and other roles, such as approver and editor roles, as well as deployer roles, are assigned on a per object basis for GPOs, Intune profiles, AD containers, as well as administrative containers. The new restricted settings feature gives you precise control over which policy areas within a GPO can be edited by a GPO editor. For example, you can prevent an editor from changing security settings in a GPO while still allowing them to configure other policy areas, ensuring greater control and protection over sensitive configuration. CMGPI also keeps track of all changes done within the product, as seen in the menu option entitled Audit Log. The settings menu allows you to configure default approvers, require comments at object check-in, and also be able to enforce naming conventions using regular expressions. So, for example, if I enable a specific expression here, I can verify that it works, save it, and now that is my new GPO naming rule. Under the Alerting Settings tab, you can configure a default email or distribution list for system alerts. You can also configure a Teams connection setting so that you can be notified via Teams on different actions, approve, check-in, check-out, and so forth. Now let's log in as an editor. As an editor, you have a set of objects associated with you. You can check out, edit, and perform change control operations on these objects without affecting the production version. You can view differences between current and prior versions, history of changes, and more. Another key difference between AGPM and Change Manager is that Change Manager allows you to manage containers, such as organizational units. You can link additional GPOs, enable or delete links, and control block inheritance. You can also roll back a change. So in this case, I have deleted a GPO and I want to go back to the previous version. So I'm going to roll back the change, approve the change, and deploy the change. Now, I wanted to show you how the same change control process applies to Intune profiles. You can edit settings, assignments, and scope tags. You're alerted of out-of-band changes with Intune. You can also roll back unwanted changes to Intune profiles, something that's not available natively with Intune. So if we wanted to make a change to, let's say, this Intune profile, we'll check out the profile, edit the settings. It takes you to the admin center. And here you can make a change. I'm going to enable Windows Health Monitoring, review, save. Once done, simply close the window, check in, enter the ticket number. We can see we're already alerted that there was a check-in and it's waiting for approval. I'm just going to simply approve this and then deploy the change. You also have the option to schedule the deployment to a different date as well. And the deployment is done. Now, CMGPI comes with an awesome feature called Global Settings Search. Basically, it allows you to search for a path or a value that can be located within any GPO or Intune profile. So if I want to look for something with the word password in it, it will go and search the environment, and it'll tell you which GPOs contain that, that term password. You can then select the one that you want, and you can simply select more details. It will take you to that GPO, and you can either make changes to it or review the more settings. And it's the same thing with Intune profiles. You can select, I'm going to use the same password, and it finds the Intune profile that contains the term password in either the path or the value. So let's now briefly walk through what an AGPM import would look like. We've provided a command line utility called maintenance tool that will use for importing AGPM GPO history and backups into Change Manager for Group Policy and Intune. So I have the syntax here. I'm going to simply just press enter. It's going to look at the archive for AGPM, import it, and restart the CMGPI service. And so it looks like it started. Now we can log into CMGPI and take a look at what was imported. Okay, so let's look at to see which GPOs exist in AGPM. And so I go to my change control in AGPM, and you can see that there's a list of different GPOs. I'm going to focus on this one here, Group AD AGPM controlled GPO. And let's take a look at the version difference here. So we can see the change that was done. First of all, if we go into the audit log, we can see here that this check-in was done by AGPM, checked in, and the comment was updated security policy, and that was the version 2.8. And that was done in AGPM. So now if I go to my objects and I go to that GPO, which is the Cuprum AGPM controlled GPO. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to check this out, and I'm going to make a change. And then what I'll do is I'll roll back the change to the AGPM version that was checked in. So let's just make a change here. We'll edit. Then I'm going to make a change to the account lockout policy here that we made in AGPM. So I'm going to just not define this, and because it really shouldn't be in this GPO. So now I've removed it, and now I go back to the group policy, and I can check it in. And what I'll do is I'll put my ticket number. I will approve this change. And now I'll deploy the change, and I'll deploy immediately. So now if we go back into, if we go to GPMC and take a look at the settings natively, so we can see here security settings, account policies, account lockout policy, and it's not defined. So that change was undone from what was done in AGPM. And so we see that it's actually been done into production. So now let's say I wanted to roll back the version of this GPO back to the AGPM version. So we removed the account lockout policy. So let's go back to version 2.0, which would be the AGPM version. Now we're going to submit it. We will now approve the request, and we'll now deploy the change to production. So now if we go back into GPMC, we want to take a look at this natively. We can take a look at the same GPO. We'll edit it to take a look at the policy to make sure it was rolled back correctly. So we go to security settings, account policy, and lockout policy, and you can see that the restore of the backup that AGPM created has been completed successfully. And so now this has been rolled back to the version that was in AGPM. So we've highlighted just a few features that can be found in Change Manager for Group Policy and Intune. There are so many more features that are available. I've listed just a few here. Support for SSO using Entra ID users and groups. We have a powerful PowerShell interface, which includes about 85 plus commandlets within the module. We have the ability to assign GPOs, containers, and Intune profiles to an administrative container to create a virtual container for delegation aligned to business or operational needs. And we also have the ability to restore deleted GPOs. We've added support for installation on Windows Server 2025. Change Manager also supports SQL Server or Azure SQL. And as you noticed in our demo, we have the ability to define the severity and of a change ticket number in the check-in dialog. And then finally, Change Manager does come with high availability, so you can deploy Change Manager in a highly available environment.
That is a lot of demo. Let me move on to the next slide if I can figure it out. There's a lot covered in that walkthrough. There's a lot to consider. We have a lot of these videos up on our YouTube channel. You can find them through our website. Check out our blog. There's a lot going on. Let's dive in to some Q&A. And I'm going to pass it over to you, Danny, if you have anything top of mind as I sort of scroll through some of the questions.
Yeah, so some Dustin had mentioned, we've had some, he's not particularly using AGPM, but, he's had some trouble with moving settings and not applying as expected. Would CMGPI help with that? In particular, it would be reporting pack and compliance manager that would assist you with that. Reporting pack could tell you what's in the multiple, what settings are in the multiple GPOs. Compliance manager can tell you what's actually getting to your endpoints and if there's any, and which is the winning GPO that's providing that setting. So check that out. If you'd like to reach out, we can also kind of walk through those products with you. Will there be a recording sent for the presentation? Yes, everybody that's everybody that has registered will get a link to this webinar, and then you can also share it with your peers. Let's look at some others.
There will be a recording sent out. I think that was answered in there. Rob had asked.
Yeah.
A couple people asked. Does the continuous upload of Change Manager logs queue in the event of internet connection failure? So let's think of architecture for a bit. So there's two different elements to what's going on in the service. One is the transactions. So those actual activities that are taking place, and when they're taking place, they're triggered. That service availability needs to be there, so that is going to be tracked. And then from a Windows perspective, we have an app log that we provide that gets a little different layer of detail around different things that are occurring. Again, network connectivity being what it is, you have to ensure that that is available. But the Microsoft Cloud is not super relevant to the change management aspect, if that makes sense. Your SQL Server, your on-prem infra that allows you to communicate from your web page, the Change Manager web experience, to the database is all in your environment. If Intune is down, you obviously can't import Intune profiles, you can't do edits or whatever, but it will be back up. The two things are not related. So I think you're fine there, Rob. Oh, Darren already answered that question. Our fearless leader is in there helping us out, so thanks, Darren. Moving from hybrid, it's funny. Well, maybe funny is the wrong word. Moving from hybrid to cloud, or moving from on-prem to hybrid to cloud. Again, for most organizations that we talk to, this is not a one and done thing. That hybrid experience is really part of the reality of how we're currently managing and will be managing for a while. Danny called this out in his demo. When I'm migrating a GPO or maybe doing GP consolidation, I have an opportunity to look at that and understand what settings within there are going to be supported by the current CSP models in Intune. And I can make those Intune profiles on the fly. Like through Migrator, I could say, keep these in GP, but let's move these to an Intune profile. Super efficient, very easy. Very secure. We connect through enterprise app registration, which is really nicely developed. So we believe, and I think what we're seeing is most organizations are in this hybrid mode. We check Intune and we check the services all the time to make sure that we are aware of current schema changes. As most of you know, Microsoft updates the service, the Intune service every month. And we monitor, maintain, make sure that if there's new settings exposed through settings catalog, we're going to get there, all of those kinds of things. So hybrid, go ahead. Did you have a comment there, Danny?
Nope. Yeah, I'm just reading through the comments. Yeah.
I see Darren addressed Rushi's comment about FedRAMP. Lots of thank yous. Thank you for attending. Hopefully it was helpful and a good discussion. Appreciate all of the valuable insights. And keep us in mind. Give us feedback and let us know if you have ideas or if you have observations. I'm going to use that to say thank you. Appreciate you spending your time with us today. Thank you, Danny. You're always a pleasure to work with.